Hello, everyone. So lovely to be here with all of you. And thank you for waiting in the wait room. And my name is Haesun Moon. And it's actually spelled in a way that I was hoping that it's easier to pronounce, but it's just phonetically, it's Hey Sun, like saying hey to sun. So lovely to be here with all of you. I just came back from another conference. It just happened to be on the same day, and it was in-person conference downtown Toronto, but that's where I live, Toronto, Canada. And we had 450 people in person, and I didn't know how exciting and exhausting that is at the same time. So anyway, I am back from that this afternoon. It's about 3:00 my time here. And for those of you who are joining from different time zones, welcome, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So there you go. There's everybody. Hi. And today's conversation will be about meta conversation for those of you who actually, looked at the title. And it will be a simple but very sophisticated way of looking at how conversations work. And I think I've done a few times through EMCC talking about conversations and how it actually works and what kind of misunderstanding do we have and so on and so forth. But today will be even simpler than what we have been talking about in the last few years. So hopefully that's exciting for you. I am curious, where are you all joining from? So you know what to do on Zoom. Put it in the chat box stuff. So here you go. So maybe where you are in terms of geographical location, or if you want to put it as your emotional location, that's also okay. Or if you want to put, hey, here's where I am in philosophical sense, that's also okay. So there you go. Hello, everyone from many different places. That is so cool. Thank you, Miami. Mentally tired but excited. Thank you for both geographic and emotional location. Thank you. Interested. That's cool. Excited. That's awesome. So feel free to just chat with other people as well in the chat box and throughout the session. I'm going to actually pace it so that it's not too fast or too slow. So I really invite you to interact, put your answers in the chat box, and maybe we might even have 2 or 3 different breakout rooms depending on how it goes. And I think another one that I would love to ask you to do is it will be highly interactive. So I can show you some theories and stuff like that as well. But let's get really practical right from the beginning, because conversation is something that we do. So conversation, yes, it's something that we think about too, because as a word, conversation means it's a place you live or the dwelling place, whether it's mental, emotional, whatever, interactional. Conversation actually used to mean in the 14th century, your address. So as we talk about conversation, I highly recommend you engage with what you see here. I assume that many of you are working or practicing as coaches, mentors, and so on and so forth. Yes, that's my guess. Yeah, okay. And very quick question to all of you. When you work with people, whether it's your client, maybe some of you are teaching too, so maybe your students, and I always ask this question, how do you know that they are making progress? Because they come to you for some reason. And how do you know that they're making progress? What does progress look like? For different people, it may look different, but how do you know that they're making progress? Esther says, ask them. I know, ask them, right? Yes. And as you think about, how do you know that people are making progress? And then the follow-up question to that is, how do you know that their progress has anything to do with you? Maybe you're coaching, psychotherapy, maybe mentoring, whatever it is that you do. I love it when I see students or clients make progress, and I would like to take all the credit. But how do we know that their progress has anything to do with what we do? And that is a piece of efficacy that we're going to talk about here. So what I have here, I have some PowerPoint slides that I want to show you. So hopefully that's okay. And also I can see some of your faces here. So I will be looking at some of your faces as well as chat box. So topic today is meta conversation. Whenever you see this word meta, it just means about this. So if I say metacognition is like cognition about cognition. Meta conversation is conversation about conversation. You know that, right? So it's the meta conversation. So when we look at coaching conversation, mentoring conversation, what kind of conversations are we having about that? Especially when you're teaching it, or if you're supervising somebody else to practice this. What kind of conversation do we have about those conversations? How do we, when we are looking at somebody's work, how do we know that it's a solid, hey, this is a solid coaching practice? Or, wow, that was a useful mentoring session. How do we know that? So meta conversation is very useful, especially if you are working with people in teaching or learning how to do this. So we're going to look at some assumptions, biases, and choices that people make in conversations. I really hope that you notice that I tried my best to make it ABC. You see that? Assumption, biases, choice. Anyway, so there you go. Hey, first quick little thing. Let's say here is your first client. This is Tony. And Tony says this, and your task is how would you respond to Tony? And Tony says in the middle of your session, Tony says, oh, I would like to gain some perspective around organization with a project that's just come up at work. It's a project that wasn't, something that I planned for. It's sort of on top of everything else that I'm doing, but it has a big impact if it doesn't go well. And it's something that I don't have a choice about. Okay. How would you respond to Tony? You're sitting in front of Tony and you're like, okay, what am I going to do? So how would you respond to Tony? Feel free to put it in the chat box. For some reason, I cannot see the chat. So I'll figure that out. So when you look at, when you're sitting down with Tony and they say that, and your next response would be, okay, I'm going to give it about 1 more minute because I have 2 other cases that I would love for you to just look at. So it could be you as a mentor, it could be you as a coach, or even as a therapist. And you will say this. What would you say? Meet the next client, Jamie. Jamie says, in the beginning of your session, Jamie says, oh, I've been struggling with that for some time. I really want to see some positive changes, but I find myself going back to my old habits. I know I can do it, and others seem to think that too, but for some reason, I don't seem to be able to move forward as much as I want to. Okay. What would you say for Jamie? At this point of your conversation, you say to Jamie, okay. And you say, it's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, please feel free to put it in the chat box. And right now, I don't see the chat for some reason, but I see the numbers go up. So when I stop share, I'm going to go back and check. Okay. And especially just pay attention to some words or phrases that sort of kind of like pop out at you. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. I want to know more about that. So see which one really grabs your attention. What are you curious about when you talk to Jamie? Okay. And then your last client, please meet JP. JP, in the beginning of your conversation, JP says, well, you know what? I thought about what might be a good coaching topic. I would like to be more productive in life because I just feel lazy lately with a lot of Netflix. And if we can somehow figure out how to overcome this barrier, I think I can find a way to reach my best self on a more regular basis. These are actual excerpts from recorded coaching sessions, by the way. So and it's not the real client, it's just a photo of somebody on internet. So JP says this, and what would you say to JP? Well, I thought about what might be a good coaching topic and so on. What would you say? Now I'm so curious. I have to stop share, go back, and then look at the chat. I don't know why I can't see the chat. And as you're looking at this, what's so interesting is your choices actually show a lot of your biases and assumptions. And I think what's so interesting is all of you actually talked about, okay, what about this? Tell me more about this. What about how would positive change look like? What's the struggle right now? And what does it mean for you to move forward? And what is the barrier? This is neat, isn't it? Tell me more about what you want. So this is something that we might actually say. And what we're going to look at today is this. We have some key assumptions, whether you are doing coaching, mentoring, therapy, teaching, and any of those learning and development kind of profession, or I would say calling. You're called to serve in that way professionally. That's amazing. And we have some key assumptions about people that we work with. So first key assumption that we have is a very simple one. By the way, I have a PhD. That means I know how to simplify stuff. So here's a simple key assumption. Number one, people want something. That's our key assumption, that, hey, people want something. Is that safe to say? All of you here, you want something more, something better, something less. And there are some things that we want in our life. Maybe it's awesome. It's really good. Maybe you want it to continue. Maybe you want something to stop. Maybe you want something to start. Maybe you want somebody else to change. So key assumption number one is people want something. And as you go back to Tony's narrative, do you see what Tony wants? What is Tony telling you that he wants? In this quick narrative, it's about 3 sentences. And Tony says, here is what I want. And as you can tell, what do you think? If you just look at Tony's narrative with that one filter, here's what Tony says. I'd like to gain some perspective is what he actually says that he wants. We can infer that, maybe he wants the project to go well. Yes, we can infer that, but that's not what Tony actually says, but we can infer based on this context. Maybe Tony wants less workload. Maybe. In this context, we can actually infer that, but that's not what he actually says. What he really says, with his words, is I would like to gain some perspective. If you were there last year when we talked about patterns of what coaches actually do or mentors do, seasoned coaches pattern of conversation, you may remember, or if this is your first time, that's awesome. Or if you were there and then you forgot, that's also amazing. So I get to actually repeat myself. And what we see is practitioners who are seasoned in whatever practice that they do, but especially in strength-based, appreciative, relational, and dialogic practices, there are a few of them, then we see that a lot of times clients' words are preserved. So we don't add a lot, but we tend to preserve the client's language. So Tony is telling you, hey, here's what I want. I would like to gain some perspective. Interesting. What about Jamie? What do you hear that Jamie says that she wants? And some of you already touched on it, right? She wants to see some positive changes. Does she want to go back to old habits? No. And does she want old habits to stop? Maybe we can infer that. Oh, I know I can do it, and others seem to think that too. Does she want it? I don't know. But for some reason, she says, I don't seem to be able to move forward as much as I want to. And many of you actually picked up on this word, moving forward. Is that what Jamie wants? I think so, because she says that. She not only wants to move forward, but move forward as much as I want to is what she says. These two are exact words of the clients that they say, here is what I want. I really want to, they say this, and I want to be able to, or I don't seem to be able to. This is what the client says that they want. And it's interesting because in your responses, some of your responses were really building on this idea of what the client wants. And that is actually the first step to having that coaching conversation so that they can curate those stories of purpose, possibilities, and preferences. What about JP? JP has some struggles, and also JP's got some issues and stuff like that. But what is JP telling you that they want? Not only inferred wants, but actual wants that JP says in their own words. You see the clue there, right? I would like to be. So right there, I'm going to actually just, how do I annotate? I don't know how to annotate, so that's okay. So what you can see is when JP says, I would like to, it's a very good clue that they're going to tell you what they want. JP says, be more productive and be more productive in life. And what else do you see? Yeah. Figure out how to overcome is what JP wants. And also JP says, find a way to reach my best self on a more regular basis. This is pretty interesting, isn't it? So key assumption number one was people want something. And usually it shows up like that in a short narratives. And here's assumption number two. Assumption is they must have a good reason for wanting that. And, working with people who are, who actually present a rather difficult topic. In my mind, it's a difficult topic. When somebody says, I really want to, and this is a real case, I think, that I told you about, a case where somebody wanted to actually die. Okay. And that's what they want. In a medical setting, that's what they actually wanted medically done. So in Canada, it became legal in 2016 that people can choose that option of medical assistance in dying. And that's what patients want. It was really difficult for me actually to work with that topic. So going there with this assumption that you must have a good reason for wanting that. In conversation, if it's phrased like this, so what are you hoping to end by dying? Is the phrase that I used. If I come with that assumption that you want something and you must have a good reason for wanting that. So I asked one of the patients who were considering it, what are you hoping to end by dying? And she sure had good reasons. She said, well, I want to end pain and suffering. And those are three top reasons why people actually want that is pain and suffering ended. Second is financial burden, emotional burden on their loved ones. Third one is, I want to die with dignity. So I want to remember who I am when I die. And that was the reason for her. The patient that I talked to, Gina. So key assumption number two is whether it's a lighthearted coaching conversation in a hallway in passing or in that kind of intense conversation with a dying patient, assumption is that they must have a good reason for wanting that. Now, when you go back to Tony wants this. Tony wants to gain some perspectives. Now, do you see some good reasons that Tony has for wanting that? Why would he want that? I would like to gain some perspectives. Now, do we have that information here? Can we even infer that information? And if we don't have that information, how might we actually get that information out? He must have a good reason to want that. Okay. Feel free to actually speak as well. I would love to hear from you because I have a hard time actually finding the chat. I don't know why it's happening, but anyway. So what do you hear in Tony's narrative here that his good reason for wanting that? What do you think? He wants it because... Okay, let me just do this so I can see your faces there. I see your faces. Perfect. Maybe you can infer that he wants to do a good job. Maybe you can infer that, well, it has a big impact. I don't want to ruin it. Maybe. And also it's something that he has to do and he wants to do a good job. We can infer all that. So what will be Tony's good reason? And if you were to actually ask Tony, because you might not have full information about what's your good reason, how would you say that? Maybe as a mentor, as a leader, as a coach, you sit down with Tony and you might say something like this. So Tony, suppose you actually somehow gain that perspective so that especially around that organization with a project, how would you know that that perspective was a really useful one to have? If you do that, preserving Tony's language and simply build on it, build on what Tony says he wants and says, you must have a good reason for wanting that. What difference would that make for you? Now you're having full-in coaching conversation. You may not know the answer to your own question, but Tony does. So Tony, suppose you gain that perspective and somehow it's turning out to be really useful for this organization with a project. How would you know that this is useful for you? Okay. Now, here's a second one that we can look at. Jamie. Jamie says, this is something that she wants, seeing some positive changes and also moving forward as much as she wants to. Now, what is Jamie's good reason for wanting this? Just simply looking at Jamie's narrative here, what do you see as she must have a good reason? I see Clara drinking. What is it? Water? Okay. Water in a wine glass? That's awesome.
What? With a strawberry in it, not wine.
Okay, there you go. It's so good to actually see you thinking. And there you go. Anna, what are you drinking? You're muted, but it's in a wine glass. Must be good.
It's water, but I'm so delighted. Cheers.
Thank you. As Jeremy is actually also taking a sip. So all of you, what do you think? As you're looking at this person talking about their life logic, and the word logic comes from logos, and logos means words. So when you listen to people's words, it contains, or it actually refers to their life logic, the way that they do their life. So there must be a good reason why they're introducing some words here. Now, when you look at Jamie's narrative, what are some of her good reasons? And if you don't know, then we need to ask about it. Okay? So pretty soon, I'm going to actually put you in a breakout room. So Wayne, if you can get ready some rooms, that will be awesome. And I'm thinking maybe 3 people in a room will be nice. Hopefully you're okay talking to people. Is it okay? Yeah? I mean, it seems like so far people are tolerable here. But, you haven't talked to them, so we may not know that. So maybe 3 or 4 people, Wayne, that would be great. And the last little bit before you go into your breakout room is this. JP says she's giving you, well, they're giving you a few things here. JP says, this is what I want. This is what I want. This is what I want. And some of them are a little bit more into the future. And some of them are something to do with you and I meeting together. I want this to happen in our meeting so that it can go there in the future. I want to be more productive in life. It's a little bit farther out in the future than figuring out how to overcome this, you and I. That is happening in session right now. And then also, then JP says, find a way to reach my best self on a more regular basis. Now, this is interesting. Okay. So when you actually hear JP say that, what might be some of their good reasons for wanting what they want? Okay. So we're working with these 3 narratives. And Wayne, are the rooms ready by any chance? For some reason, I don't see the breakout rooms either. There you go. There, I see that. Okay. So you know what? Here's what I'm, Wayne, are you there? If not, then I can make it too.
I am here, yes.
Oh, you are? Okay, perfect. So if you want to actually create the breakout rooms, that will be awesome. Maybe 3 or 4 people in each room. And here's the thing. When you're in your breakout rooms, I mean, first thing is say hi and be nice to people. That's one. And the second thing is, we just looked at 3 different narratives, Tony, Jamie, and JP. And there are some things that show up as what they say that they want. Now, then I would love for you to talk about how do you expand on this idea of what people want, especially in the case of JP. JP, you know, they're giving you a few different ones here, especially with JP, be productive in life, more productive in life, figure out how to overcome, find a way to reach my best self. How would you continue the session with JP? So please chat about that in your breakout rooms, especially with JP, who are giving you a few things here. How would you continue your coaching session or mentoring session with JP if you're intending to really build on the sense of, here's what I want? Okay. You have about 7 minutes or 5-6 minutes, actually. So please chat about it and please come back after 5-6 minutes. Have fun. You know what? I was in one room as well. And I am so curious about some of your conversations that you had, because maybe in some of your rooms, you talked about, you know what, I think Jamie is this kind of person. I mean, I sort of limited your bias by showing you the photo or the image of the person. But if I didn't, then you might actually have some images in your head. It's like, oh, it's this images about maybe gender, maybe age, maybe even race and all those things. You have that, especially when you hear this thing about, I want to reach my best self, but there's a Netflix. And then you're like, you know, I think it's a younger person. Somehow we have those biases, don't we? You might be surprised that that client actually was a 52-year-old male executive. And I actually use completely different photo just to sort of throw you off a little bit. But when we hear people talk or look at transcript, we can't help but to form some ideas about who I think you are. I think you are this kind of person, or I think you are this kind of person. And that shows up from the minute you actually see them. The minute somebody calls to actually make an appointment with you, if you actually talk to them, the way that they talk, maybe some accents that you actually hear from that's different than yours. And you start to form all these different assumptions about people. And I love actually going to different places with my mom, because my mom doesn't speak English that well. So all of a sudden people talk to me and they're not sure if I could speak English or not. Then I answer them. They're like, oh, okay, you know, that's kind of cool. And they talk. But then the minute my mom says something, there's something people do. They slow down a little bit. And you know, like another thing that's really interesting is when we went to Japan, I don't speak Japanese. I speak Korean. But my mom looks I don't know what it means, but she apparently looks Japanese. So people started to talk to her in Japanese in like regular speed. And my mom she knows a few words. And when she answers them, they know immediately. It's like, oh, you're a foreigner. Now that happens a lot, actually, when we go somewhere. My mom loves right now, after COVID happened, one of the things that she stopped doing is dyeing her hair darker. So she's got a silver, beautiful silver, like it's silver, beautiful. And you know what happens now? My mom says, people are nicer to me. I think they think I'm older. So she's like, I am not dyeing my hair back to black. It's interesting. We just can't help. So there are some assumptions that we make. And assumption is something that we can really work with, especially when you work with questions. We can work with assumptions. So let me give you a couple examples. Right in the beginning of your coaching conversation, what do you say in your opening? 3 most popular openings, especially in coaching, has been these 3. Number 1, what brought you here? I think that's informed by medical models and therapy. What brought you here? Second one is, what would you like to talk about? Or these days, people want to kind of make it sound slightly airy, so they say, "What's on your mind? What's emerging for you?" So any kind of those things. So what's on your mind? And then another one that actually people say is, "How can I help you?" Especially when you work with questions, think about, how can I help you? What assumptions do you see in how can I help you? Even coaching sessions, I don't know why people say that. I think you heard it somewhere when you go to like Best Buy or something. People say, how can I help you? Well, that's for Best Buy. It's not for like coaching conversation. What do you mean, how can I help you? So when somebody says, how can I help you? What does that actually assume? Yep. It's interesting because in that one line, or how can I help you? You hear the assumption that you need help. And that's the assumption that we bring or embed in our questioning. Second assumption is, I can help. I am the helper. Yep. Third one is, you're going to tell me what kind of help you need. And fourth one will be you telling me will be useful. And there's so many assumptions in that one liner. How can I help you? Right? And then also, and yes, Meryl says it's a hierarchical construct. Absolutely, it could be. How can I help you? Excuse me, who do you think you are? How can I help you? Another thing is, what brought you here? And I love this question. I loved this question until I said this to one of the clients who came in, and she was a foreign student studying in Canada. She came into the coaching center. I said, hey, what brought you here? And of course, she says, by bus. I came here by bus. It's like, what? And she literally thought, what actually brought you here? And then I realized that we say that, but then the assumption is very interesting. Something brought you here is the assumption. Maybe it wasn't you who came, but something brought you here. Assumption is very clear in the questions that you ask. In some of your groups, you might have said, so what's getting in the way of you reaching your best self? Now, what assumptions do you have if you say that? Because every question has embedded presuppositions. In your assumption, are you assuming the presence of their resources or absence of their resources? What's getting in the way of you reaching your best self? Here's what happens. Maybe there's nothing getting in the way, but now because you asked, there will be something getting in the way because they will answer you. That's what we talk about in appreciative inquiry, right? Your words create your world. So if you ask somebody what's now getting in the way, now they have to answer you. So they will create something that's getting in the way. Maybe it's my motivation, or maybe, I don't know, maybe so they do that. Oh, I have ADHD. Some people say that. because they need to find an answer to your question. Based on research, that's what people do, especially coaching therapy clients. They usually take your assumption that you embed in question by answering it. Not many times, clients will stop in the middle of your conversation and do meta. They don't say, wait a second, do you actually assume that in your question? I'm not going to answer that. They don't do that. They're not your teenage child, okay? They don't do that. So clients will answer you. But there are sometimes clients will stop and say, I'm not sure if I get what you're saying. Have you had those moments when clients like,
yes,
sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. And then that's so interesting because now they're doing the meta. So it's like, how come they're doing the meta? They got out of the conversation and now they're doing meta. And when we go back to that moment and look at the transcript, you know what's happening there? Especially when your client says, I don't understand what you're saying. That's when you start adding stuff. When practitioners are adding words that client didn't speak about. So when you actually put in your logos in their story, many times clients will be like, yeah, I'm not sure if I will call that, but okay. They might take it, but then they will notice that that's not their words. Sometimes when your client is searching for words, what do you call it? And then you say, is it this? They're like, yes. Well, you introduce new words and they're like, yes. Now that's what we call calibrated in communication science. So there are some words or meanings that are calibrated and there are some that are not. So for example, if the client says, well, I really want to reach my best self and, Netflix is getting in the way. And then you as a coach might actually add something like, so, is that, let's say Netflix could talk to you. What do you think your Netflix will, tell you to do, or some random things like that. Okay. So I've heard some people do crazy things. And then the client is like, what do you mean Netflix can talk? Now, this is a moment the client is like, don't be silly. No, do not impose your logic on me, is what they're saying. But if the client is like, that is so funny. Okay. So I've done this actually with a client. I said, so suppose there are two scales in your life. And the first scale is scale of motivation. Second scale is called scale of confidence. And let's suppose those two scales go to a bar and they sit there and they're going to talk about you. And I'm watching the client's response and he is like, yeah, okay. I know that it's calibrated and I can continue. But let's say if I say the same thing, they go to a bar and drink water with strawberry in a wine glass. I don't know. And then the client says, I don't drink, I don't go to a bar. That's when you drop it because it's not calibrated. So assumptions are amazing when you look at those assumptions. I'm going to go back to this idea of looking at the transcript really carefully, because maybe, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually show you something a little bit different. I think this might be actually pretty cool to do. And maybe for us to have this meta conversation, we talked about two key assumptions. There's one more, by the way. First key assumption is people want something. Second one is they must have a good reason to want that. And for those of you who are familiar with the DOQ, I hope that this is a wonderful review. For those of you, you've never heard this ever in your life, welcome to this threshold concept that is about to ruin your life. And I apologize in advance because you can't see the conversation the same way anymore after you know this. So there's a fair warning. And here's a very simple way to organize, let's say, client content we hear. So when client, Tony, Jamie, JP, in their narrative, we see some things that they say. So first one is, there's a timeline going left to right. So from left side is they tell you something that happened in the past. I don't know if I can actually annotate anything? Can I annotate? No, I can't. Pen. Wow, this is kind of cool. Can I do that? It writes. This is crazy. That's awesome. So here, you know what? Maybe I think I've already done that. I think there's a PowerPoint. So maybe I don't even have to do that. I knew that. So there you go. I don't have to write it. So there is a timeline going from left to right, which is past to future. Do you remember what JP was talking about? Tony, Jamie, they told you something that happened in the past. And also, especially Tony said, oh, if it doesn't go well, huge impact. They tell you something that might happen in the future. This was added on top of everything that I have to do, he said. That's something that happened in the past, you see? And then also they tell you something that they want. This is our key assumption number 1, right? They want something. This is what I want. And on the bottom of the quadrant is, this is not what I want. I want this less. And top of the quadrant is vertical line is, this is what I want more. This is what we call preference line. So timeline and preference line, they intersect in the middle. And what happens is now we have 4 areas. So quadrant 1 is what we call, when clients talk about, here's what I want to see happen in the future, wouldn't that be lovely? It's called preferred future. Hopeful future, this is what I would love to see happen, whether it's events, interactions, thoughts, feelings. This is what I would love to have. Second quadrant, actually going counterclockwise, is this is something that people tell you happened in the past that they really liked, whether it's interaction. Well, whenever I pass by this guy, we do this and I love it. Could be a small, like really brief moment of interaction. And also it could be thoughts, feelings, and all those things that happen in the past. We call that resourceful past. And you heard that in this transcript. Third one is people tell you, oh gosh, I can't believe this happened. Oh, guess what happened? If somebody says, guess what happened with this tone and voice, you are not going to get amazing things happened. You're going to get, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. There's something that happened in the past that you didn't like. Maybe with the same person, I can't believe, because actually with my teenage boys, my nephews, I don't know who they're going to wake up to. So some days I get like, sweet, I want to go see a movie with you, aunt. Some other days we're like, I don't want anything to do with you. I'm going out with my friends. So like with the same person, some days I have amazing resourceful past experience. Some days I'm like, gosh, why are you like that? We call that troubled past. It has some other names, including that this is where regrets live. Some of your regrets and some of the small t trauma and big T trauma lives there. And right now we are living in quite a bit of like quadrant 3. And then we could have done this better is one example of a quadrant 3. But a bigger area that we right now dwell, especially in our conversation, remember conversation is your dwelling place. Simply turn on your Apple News or some news channel and see what they talk about. We're talking about some things that didn't go well and some things that might go wrong, which we call dreadful or dreaded future. Fear, they live there. Anxiety live there. And it's incredible to see the news channels. I think that quadrant 4 is their like main business. This is what might happen. And it just scare you all. And here's what's interesting though, is that as human species, positive psychology will tell you that there's a very clear indicator that we are so good at detecting and dwelling in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. And that's how we're just wired, because we need to survive. So we are so good at detecting threats. Some of you, your home is quadrant 3. My sister's home is quadrant 3. Oh, every day she comes back from like work and go, I can't believe this person did that. This person, complainer, gosh, seriously. My home is quadrant 4. What might go wrong? What might go wrong? I'm the risk manager in my family. Now then, the question is this. In your coaching conversation, where do you want your clients to be after 30 minutes or 45 minutes of conversation with you? Where do you want your clients to dwell in? Which quadrant? Let me see if I can actually see your, there you go. I can see the chat box, yay. Nicola says 1. Yeah, you think. Well, Fred, thank you. You say 1. That's interesting. Many of you say prefer future. Cool. Okay. And Nikolai, I want to be in 1 myself. Here's the thing. You wouldn't actually see a lot of people who are naturally in quadrant 1. I actually met one patient who had dementia and she forgot to worry. And that was awesome, actually. That was really awesome. And she was a very worried person all her life, and she actually forgot to worry. And I was talking to her and her daughter, and we were just chatting about how wonderful it was, actually. And she said, my mom actually looks younger. She forgot to worry. Interesting, eh? Now, Linda says 2, then 1. And some of you say 1 or 2, as Jeremy says. And here's the thing. If you think coaching conversations should be 1 or 2, did your earlier intervention, do you think that's going to actually put them there? I'm just reading your transcript here. What is getting in the way of you reaching your best self? Or when you actually say, it's all written, right? So if you say, well, what are the barriers here? And tell me more about this. And how come so you don't have a choice? Now, when you respond that way, which quadrant are you actually highlighting? Because whatever you pay attention to will grow. And if you think coaching is about maybe our clients really dwelling in quadrant 1 or 2, then are we actually doing that in our sessions? And that's the efficacy question. But I want to caution you that quadrant 3 and 4 are not to be avoided, by the way. It's not like we have phobia about, no, these are really useful information. People talk about this is what didn't go well, then we can always shift the conversation to, wow, that sounds really difficult. And what did you learn from that? Right? Quadrant 4, oh my gosh, what if this happens? What if that happens? Okay, so this is kind of, like making you a bit anxious. Yes, it is. So you've thought about this for a long time. What's already clear for you? There are different ways of working with quadrant 3 and 4 without dwelling in there. So quadrant 3, 4 information is so useful when you acknowledge it. Another research piece is this. If you don't acknowledge information from quadrant 3 and 4, guess what happens? What do you think your clients do? They tell you quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4, and you don't acknowledge. Lucy says persists. They will repeat until they feel that they are heard. And that's the moment that we actually label our clients and say, you are such a negative complainer. I love it. And yes, that's exactly right, Harry. They don't feel heard, right? And this is so interesting because you're the one who are resisting the client's narrative, but then we turn around and label them as a resistant client. That's why we look at the videotapes. That's why we look at what actually happens in the process. Because it's all in that process. You are the one who didn't hear it. That's why the client had to repeat several times for you. So really interesting to see from a researcher perspective. Okay. And one of the things that I was in a group with Linda and Carlos, and Linda was like, I love seeing the transcript. And absolutely, because the more you actually look at it, you're going to discover some things that you didn't see before. Like, you said, what? I didn't even hear that. Because sometimes we only look at the session afterwards and we say, how was the session? How was the client? And the practitioner says, I think the session went well. Or that client was really motivated. It doesn't really tell you anything. It tells you your interpretation of what you think happened. But unless you look at the video and transcript, it's just your interpretation. What did you hear or see the client say or do for you to say that person is motivated or the person is resistant? So thank you for actually appreciating the transcript, Linda. I was like, yes, great. That's the researcher me, like, really delighting. And let me see if I can show you next a little bit here. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop share right now and go back to our narrative. Okay. And, Harry, when you say active listening, what's interesting is this. One of the things that we learned in active listening in this traditional sort of way that it's taught is show them that you're listening by do this. So they will tell you paraphrase, maybe echo, summarize, make eye contact and stuff like that. And it's amazing that all of us, we do this. There are a couple of research that I want to introduce is one, there are, especially in communication research, what's emerging right now is some phrases that you use, such as, so if I heard you correctly, correct me if I'm wrong. Those are phrases that we learned in active listening, isn't it? So what I hear you say is, and then we summarize. That's the formula that we're given. And the research shows the minute people hear that at work, trust goes down. They feel like you are doing this crap on me. You're not working with me. You are doing this trick on me is the feel that people get. Isn't that scary? So what we think happens versus what actually happens is the efficacy, is the meta that we're talking about here. Another thing is this. You need to maintain eye contact. Really? Do we really need to do that? You know what? Actually, let me show you if I have it here. I hope I have that slide here. So not as like my job is to do research like that. And when I do research, let me see if I can see. Okay, here you go. So I want to show you this example of actual video analysis. So this is actually more fun than you think. Okay, so here's a video on top. And it has all the functions. And you see this little button with play with F on it. You know what that means? It's next frame. This is like a video analysis frame by frame. You know what a frame is? Frame is like 1/16 of a second, for example. It's really, really short moment. And that's what we use in analysis of communication. And when you see the tiers here, it says what the coach says, coach utterance, client utterance, and what the coach is preserving from the client's utterance, what coach is adding, and so on and so forth. But don't worry, I'm not going to go through them all. I want to show you this one thing. You see there, it says coach nodding and gaze window. Gaze window is another name for eye contact. Okay, but gaze window is different because we think when we were taught to maintain eye contact, but in reality, here's what happens. As a listener, you're more likely to look at the speaker. But you know what the speaker does? Think about your client. What do they do when they talk to you? They don't look at you the whole time like this. I'm looking straight in the camera. They don't do this. They talk about something and they go around, go about, and then they just look up, and every now and then they come back to look at you and they go off again. And actually using Zoom, we can track their eyes, where they're looking. Sometimes they look at themselves on Zoom. And many times they look at the coach. And with Zoom, it's amazing because our clients are now self-editing. Anyway, that's another thing. But here's what happens. Gaze window is when you and I, when clients are talking, they come back to look at me and then they gaze off again. That moment of you and I looking, and it's sometimes a frame. It's so brief. It's not even a second. It's a fraction of a second that happens. So that gaze window is on for maybe 2 frames. So this is when the gaze window is on and you're like, and what's your point? Here's a point. What does that do? Gaze window is something that we teach people to do, but then why? What does that do? Here's what that does. Every time, almost always, when the client comes back to meet our eyes, you know what the coach does? Coach nods. It's like without fail. When they come back to look at me again for 1 frame, coach nods. Coach nods. There is clear correlation to gaze window and your response of nodding. Then the next question is, why? What does that do? Your nodding does something. Okay, there are different nods. They're like, I'm listening. Yeah, continue. That's when clients go off and they talk more. Let's say your gaze window is on here. So here's the thing. Gaze window over here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And there's on here. And then there's a longer on. How come? Because coach nodded in a special way. They didn't just nod and yep. This one was like, okay, a little bit slower. Okay, maybe a little bit bigger. And then they continue to look at you because they want to actually look at you and say, okay, so you're getting it. Okay, great. And they actually go off. So here's what happens when people are in conversation. They do that automatically. We do this all the time. And we call this calibration sequence. We check with each other. Did you get me? Yes, I think you got me. That calibration needs to happen. Without that, conversation cannot continue. So I'm not going to show you all the tiers, but I wanted to point this out. You know how small that is? And it's so significant. When you look at transcript like that and video analysis like this, there's so much that you don't see that now you see, right? Esther says, to what degrees in the interaction is the interaction between coach and client dependent on culture and cultural differences? This is such a fascinating question, by the way. And I'll answer that before I go back to the transcript. Here's the thing. Culture, as in sort of culture, as in my culture, I don't know what that actually means. I think there are a lot of cultures that we carry, and there are some definite culture carriers in your teams. We call them culture carriers. And in my line of work, culture is understood more like accumulation of micro conversations. So what I mean by that is, you know, your best friend or your spouse or your family, you know the shorthand, right? They don't have to even like finish the sentence. Here's the thing. When you call home and they answer the phone and you know what's up at the first hello. You have siblings or friends like that. They pick up the phone and you just know. It's like, okay, what's going on? And those are accumulated, shared understanding. So last time you did that, this happened. Last time you did that, this happened. So now we have shared, accumulated understanding of what this may mean. So we have a lot of shorthands, especially if we are familiar with it. Teams who've been working together for a long time. We know each other's narratives. I have this guy, I have a colleague who keeps on saying, I am discriminated because of my color. And he says that enough times that everyone is believing him. And then I had to correct him in the middle of a meeting because it was just not a useful narrative. So I said, look, I think there are different ways of getting discriminated. One is definitely color. The other one is competence, but very likely yours is character. And sometimes I need to, was it mean? I don't know. But anyway, that's what I actually thought. And we talked about it and we laughed about it too. But, this is the conversation challenge that I actually had to do in that context. I wouldn't do that outside of the team because this team, they know each other really well. But teams, they carry their conversations. And you can't finish each other's sentence because there's a habit in that shared language. When you accumulate enough of those micro conversations, that becomes your culture. You don't even have to say anything, you just know it. Okay. So cultural difference, I think there are some studies being done, but those are very macro level. In certain culture, nod means this, shake means something, but it's highly interpretive. What do you do if, for example, for me, I am from different cultures. I came from Korea and now I'm in North America and especially in Canada. Those are different cultures. I'm also in this culture of academia, and it has a very interesting culture there too. Then which culture will show up? But, before I show you this thing, I'm going to tell you a story that I experienced as a cultural difference, by the way. I was in another country and I was doing this demo in that country, coaching demo. I'm not going to tell you where. Eastern Europe. There you go. I can tell you that. And I was doing a demo in front of all these audience, and this coaching client came in and she started to talk about it. So, I'm having this, problem with my partner. We're getting married. So I did what was culturally sort of appropriate at the time. I said, "Oh, you're getting married. That's amazing." And she said, "Partner." So I said, "Oh, is that she or he?" And that was totally okay for me to do in my culture. Canadian culture, it was kind of like, well. But then she was so offended because in her culture, and she's like, "What do you mean? What are you assuming?" And I'm like, I didn't understand why she was so upset with me. So that was one example of cultural differences that I actually felt as a coach. It's interesting, isn't it? So is it okay? We actually go back to the transcript. Would you be okay with that? Yeah. And let me actually see if I can do that. So we go back to, so there is that quadrant there for you. Hey, let's do this now. The quadrant. Remember, Tony's saying, I would like to gain some perspective. Which quadrant is it? Quadrant 1. Something that he wants in the future. So if you actually worked around that topic of expanding that you are actually dwelling in quadrant 1, or you're inviting your client to quadrant 1. And then, there's a project that's come up at work. It's a project that wasn't something that I had planned for. Which quadrant is that? Oh, it's not something I planned for. Yeah, quadrant 3. That's not what I planned. It's sort of on top of everything else that I'm doing. Quadrant 3. But it has a big impact if it doesn't go well. Quadrant 4. Do you hear that now? I told you I'm going to ruin your listening. You can't hear any other way now. And by the way, you're wondering, where do you fit now? Not only future and past, but now. Now is actually operational sort of definition of now in this research heuristic is the time that you and I share in our session. So if they're talking about something that needs to happen during the session, that's actually considered 0.0, which is not actually indicated here, but that's actual research terminology. It's 0.0, you and I, our shared time. If the client is talking about something happening after the session, now it's considered a quadrant 1. So it might sound like, so how would you know having this conversation was useful for you as you are walking, as you go back home tonight? That's quadrant 1. As you leave my office, that's quadrant 1. By the end of our conversation is 0.0. That's the boundary, right? So Tony says it's something that I don't have a choice about. This can be in quadrant 3 and 4. So something can actually fit in more than one quadrant as well. And then think about your choices. If your intention is make sure that Tony cannot get out of quadrant 4, dreaded future, and so fearful after, talking to you that he will live his next 1 week in fear, How would you respond to him? Your intention is put him in deep quadrant 4. And please don't do that in coaching, but suppose that's what you wanted to do because you don't like them or something. You will say, what's the worst that can happen? Are you sure this is going to go well? On top of everything, you sure they're not going to give you any more? Are you sure? All that is going to make sure Tony is deeper and deeper in quadrant 4. Isn't that fun? We know how to do that. Quadrant 3. If you were to expand on Tony's quadrant 3, that he lives his next week in regret and, shame and guilt, what would you do? What would you say? How would you invite Tony to look at quadrant 3? It's like maybe you were not clear in your communication. Maybe you are not good at, telling them, like setting your boundaries. Or, what tells you that this might be maybe like, how did that go last time that somebody didn't do their project? What happened last time? You see how we can easily ruin somebody's week like that? And then now, if you're coaching and mentoring, especially in strengths-based way, how would you build on Tony's quadrant 2? How would you build on Tony's quadrant 1? It's a question for you. As we move to, oh, this is so much fun. Jamie. Remember Jamie with those old habits? Oh, and I put in that old habits because so many times people are like, tell me about the old habits. We're just so curious about those old habits. We think we need to know more for us to be useful. How much information do you need? Is it just okay that she says old habits and leave it that? Why do we need to figure out, tell me precisely what kind of old habits are we talking about here? How would that help you to know that? So again, let's just quickly go through that. I've been struggling with that for some time. Which quadrant is that? We can safely assume that she doesn't want to struggle. So we're going to put that in quadrant 3. Yes. And I really want to see some positive changes clearly in quadrant 1. Oh, but I find myself going back to my old habits. Quadrant 3, slightly in quadrant 4 as well. You see that? This is how we look at transcript. When you look at videos, it's even better because it gives you that contextual richness. So you can actually make that value judgment a little bit clearly. And she says, I know I can do it. Hey, I know I can do it. Okay. And others seem to think that too. That's above the line. Okay. But for some reason, I don't seem to be able to move forward as much as I want to. Moving forward is quadrant 1, but not being able to is below the line. In your earlier intervention, what did you expand on? And if we were to go back to Jamie right now and expand on their quadrant 1 and 2, what would you say? And is it different than your earlier response? Some of you already actually picked up on more move forward, right? And hopefully you see that it's actually pretty simple. In any point in your mentoring and coaching, ask yourself this question. What did I hear the client say that they want? Any point in your session, you should be able to answer that question. What did I hear the client say that they want? And your next intervention is simply expand on it. Now your coaching becomes so much easier and simpler. And the last one is this one. JP says, well, I thought about what might be a good coaching topic. It could be somewhere in quadrant, maybe past, but also they're talking about something that happens in our session. So it's point 0. Well, I would like to be more productive in life. Where would you put that? Quadrant 1? Where else would you put it? And here's a tiny little word that you would actually miss if we are not reading it. Okay, yes, Linda, interesting. You see that? JP says more productive. That assumes that you have been productive somewhat. So you can ask about, so tell me, so what would you say so far it's been indicator of you being productive? Because you said more productive. See, you can actually put this in quadrant 1 as well as quadrant 2 if you look closely. And she says, or JP goes by they. So because I just feel lazy lately with a lot of Netflix. Where would you put that? I just feel lazy lately with a lot of Netflix. Okay. Susan says 3. Okay. 3. Where else would you put it? Esther says 1. Okay, cool. 2, yes, 2. And Esther, probably you see this, eh? Because the word lately indicates that there's times where she or they didn't feel lazy. You can assume exception to this particular problem that's happening lately. So we can ask about, so before lately, how did you manage to actually do this before this whole Netflix thing? If you look at closely, it's not just a big chunk, but more productive indicates quadrant 1 and 2. I just feel lazy lately also assumes resourceful past as much as trouble past. Isn't that so fascinating? And clearly, JP wants to figure something out to overcome this barrier. And if you put it there, somehow we figuring this out is 0.0 and also overcoming this barrier. We can simply say, so, when did you, when were you able to actually overcome some barriers like this in the past? Now you're actually inviting them to look at their quadrant 2. If you, with the same selection, somehow figure out how to overcome this barrier, if you want to invite them to look at quadrant 1, you might do exactly the same sentence that you choose, but you might do something like this. Suppose you somehow figure this out. Somehow you figure out how you're going to overcome this barrier. What difference would that make for you? Now they're looking at quadrant 1. Anyway, and the last bit, I need to show you the last bit. Finding a way to reach my best self on a more regular basis. Which quadrant is it? You know this by now. Quadrant 1. Where else would you put it? On a more regular basis. So it's happening already. So on the days when you actually feel like you reached your best self, you want it on a more regular basis, but the days that you do, sure, irregular now, but you know what it's like. So tell me about those days. It's yes, Umberto, thank you. Yes, that's quadrant 2, isn't it? So I wanted to show you this because this excites me so much when we talk about research-based, evidence-based practices like this. This is exactly what we do. We look at the transcript and we discover so much that we actually didn't hear or see before. And it becomes clearer about, are we actually doing what we think we are doing? And how does that work? And is the client making progress as they say they are? And how do we know that they're making progress? So I love studying videotapes like this. And I really hope that you do too, because we all of us really, we learn coaching from our clients. Maybe you have some teachers that you learned through, but you don't learn from them. You learn from your clients. That's how we learn. So I really hope that you do this on a regular basis. And thank you so much for showing up. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Jason, can I chip in with a thank you as well on behalf of EMCC? I love listening to you. And I always, every time we meet, I come away feeling enriched. I really do. And I have had your book on my desk for such a long time now. And look at all these posters. I refer to all the time. So when you said, what have you already done? For you've got Hayden's book, Coaching A to Z, these really, really important little questions already is one that I use all the time to help people understand what is already happening, and that feeling of we haven't, oh, I can't do this, but what have you already done? What have you already done? So, Hasan, you've given us a gift this evening. Again, thank you so much. Can I give you an official EMCC thank you for everything that you do and everything that you bring to this wonderful set of conversations? Thank you. And I would like to invite everybody here, while I invite Hasan herself, to just, so everybody here, if you could spend a quick 30 seconds just jotting down in the chat just some of your reflections from today, while I ask Hasan the same question. And the reason I'm asking you as well, because I'd like to just capture a little 30 seconds from you that we can make into a nice video to send out to everybody as well afterwards. So can I open up the chat for you lot? And Hasan, what are you taking away yourself from this session?
As we take away from each coaching conversation about how to coach better, each sessions like this, I learn how to facilitate better. And just by watching your responses, I realized that transcript and looking at videotapes, but really staying so close to the narratives of our clients, it's so important. So that's another amazing reminder that all of you are reading it, you're engaging in this conversation with another person. You just can't study conversation about conversation. You have to be doing it and looking at it. And that's the only way that we can actually learn and get better. So that's what I'm taking away from this session. And thank you so much, everyone. Wow.
Thank you, Hasan. I loved every minute of it. Thank you.